active listening. So tonight's presentation is really going to be kind of fleshing that out a little bit more with, I hope, some practical examples that are interesting. So lighter on theory and a little more on practical stuff, I hope, tonight. All right. And anyone at any time, you never ask a therapist to start talking, because I'll start talking and I won't shut up. So if you have a question or something's interesting to you or something's resonating, I don't know if we have like a raise hand thing, if you want to do that, because I would like for these presentations to eventually become a little more conversational. I view you all as colleagues as well, and I have just been lucky to bear witness to school-based mental health when teachers are able to work alongside therapists and support staff who are embedded alongside you. So anyway, if there's any way, if you want to raise a hand, just ask the therapy guy to shut up for a second. Please feel free to do that. All right. Okay, next slide, please. So 2 objectives tonight. I'd like to present some general guidelines that I've come across for supporting classroom mental health, and then practical strategies around active listening to support social and emotional adjustment upon return. Okay, man, I really hope someday I get to present in person, because this is a little awkward, but I like in presentations to give everyone a chance to just tune in quickly with their breath. And you can do this if you want. It takes about 45 seconds. Please use these in your classrooms if you want. This one is just kind of clearing your own mental desktop. It's 7:07 on a Wednesday after we've all been working hard. I'd like to just invite you, if you'd like to, put your feet flat on the floor if you can, or just feel the chair beneath you and behind you. And if you'd like to, close your eyes completely, or let them just be half open and settled on a spot in front of you. Maybe you want to just look at this picture that I put up on the slide. And all you're going to do is just pay attention and follow the air. Follow 3 or 4 of your in breaths and out breaths. And as you do that, you can continue doing it. And just following the air, you can allow yourself to let whatever you brought into this presentation sort of slide off the desktop. Uncertainties or things unresolved or things occupying mental real estate right now can just move into, they might imagine those things sliding off your desktop into a container, if you like. And you can decide what that container might look like. And you don't even have to know what has to go exactly into the container. You can just allow it to move into that container. Might be nice for that container to have a lid, and for you to allow yourself to just close that lid and let yourself know you'll come back to it while we're together. Okay. That was longer than 45 seconds, but thank you. We're still kind of dealing with this long emergency, right? We've had great progress, and our society is no longer on lockdown, but we're still dealing with this very strange natural disaster that really doesn't have a clear, definitive endpoint to it, like other natural disasters. When there's an earthquake, there's a big hole in the ground, and there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's another town you can go to when it's a natural disaster, and the world just looks different when there's a hurricane or a tornado. But now the world still looks the same. It's the same school, the same building. We all have masks on, but this long emergency of COVID has really brought the public focus, I think, to mental health in a really, really profound way. It's my intention, has been my intention since this whole pandemic thing started, is to use this time I mean, I don't know about you, but I've never seen more articles on child mental health in my Apple News feed than I have now. Mental health is really, really part of the public conversation, and for good reason. Next slide. As, uh, as I said in my first presentation back in October, we know that uncertainty drives strong emotion. The more we understand about something's happening, why it happened, how it fits into our understanding of the world, the more quickly we can adapt to it. And what do we want to do as teachers and therapists and social workers is help our children have a sense of agency in the world, have an ability to adapt to their environments and have a sense that they have some control in their world. Well, when something impedes our understanding, like the nature of a certain event, this is going to prolong our emotional reactions to the event. Next slide, please. Something I've learned as a therapist and something I've absolutely seen in schools with effective teachers is when a kid feels connected to an adult who is stable and present and sees them fully, it has a way of inoculating their stress. Inoculating, maybe that's a strong word, but modifying, right? In more predictable times pre-pandemic, I would see how judicious use of touch with children, teachers who knew how to put their hand on the kid's shoulder in the right way would have an immediate impact on their self-regulation. And so how does this look now? We're back, many of us are back in the schools or about to be, but we're not really back. So a girl that I work with, she was adopted by a great single mom. She says, I'm excited. I'm back in the building, but I don't know if I can hug my friends yet. And I want to hug my teacher, but I could tell my teacher felt sort of funny about it. We can't sit close to each other at lunch, and our desks are far apart. We have these funny plastic things around our desks right now. So as we are reconnecting physically again, our kids are dealing with this ambiguity of being back, but not really back still. Things are still not over. And can we find ways to fully connect, or at least try to connect more fully to help our kids deal with their stress and have a sense of agency? Okay, next slide. So this is the presentation then tonight. I just have two parts. My first part here is to offer some general guidelines for practical classroom interventions, or some like a general orientation that the research suggests and that I believe will be helpful for teachers and therapists as schools are reopening. So this is kind of general orientation. The first guideline is to be wary of guidelines. One size does not fit all as we approach these kids coming back. The second is the absolute importance of reaching out for collegial support and the wisdom of your wider community right now to not worry alone as you enter into this new uncertainty. And my last guideline is for teachers to consider modified or even suspended lesson planning, which is easy for me to say as a person who's not a teacher. So I'd love any ideas around that if we have time to discuss. And this is based on feedback I've heard from other teachers and administrators, which I'll talk more about in a minute. I love this kid with
Aaron, you're going to explain what you mean by modified lesson plans?
I'm going to try. Yep. So yeah, that'll be it. So these are three guidelines. These are three slides, and then we'll get into the more practical stuff with active and empathic listening. All right. One size does not fit all. Something I've seen, and maybe you guys have seen it too, during the uncertainty of lockdown, and now in my view, the second wave of uncertainty of reopening, people are really looking for answers. And I've talked before about in the media, and certainly on my Apple News feed, people want structure. Give me the 7 best tips for sleep. Give me the 3 things I got to do to help my kid understand that they're going to be safe. We have to be careful in wanting structure that we not get rigid and slide into a one-size-fits-all approach, because COVID has impacted different communities differently. I think widespread and collective grief is a thing that we've all been going through. Loss of actual family members, loss of jobs, loss of housing, loss of stability and predictability and routine. But COVID has hit folks from different economic groups much harder. It's hit immigrant communities much harder. That's not to minimize how COVID has impacted middle income and upper income families. But we have to be careful when we look at child behavior now, and we have to be careful not to attribute all child behavior to COVID. Child trauma and child traumatic stress was happening before COVID happened. There was domestic violence before COVID. And I've seen an impulse in my mental health community and even in teachers to really, because we're all sort of still under this kind of pandemic frame, to attribute all child behavior to COVID. And we have to be careful about that. And grief takes a lot of different forms. I think it's a good model to rely on the classic stages of grief when we look at all of our emotional responses to loss during this time. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was this pediatric oncologist, this wonderful woman who came up with these stages that I'm not going to go into here, but denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance are sort of a helpful roadmap to look to. Recently, and it was actually during COVID, they added another stage of grief called meaning making. How do people make sense of suffering after they've come to accept what's going on? So one size doesn't fit all. Some kids are exhibiting emotional responses to grief and change and uncertainty, but they can also be manifesting these things physically. So behavior and mood that's prolonged for a longer period of time, it's kind of out of step with the personality, the little personality that in your students or in your own children, can be a grief response. Messed up sleep and appetite, we're always keeping a close eyes on. I've seen a lot of regression. One of my colleagues, she's a psychologist. She suggested that we really look at our kids now coming back to school as in many of them being in some states of arrested child development. To not see this kid entering 10th grade as a 10th grader. We did the best we could. Some doing hybrid, some doing completely remote. But to consider regression to earlier stages as a way of as an expression of grief and as an expression of coping. The good news is in child development, and you all know this who are parents, before a kid comes to their next stage of development, they usually fall apart a little bit. They have to visit and deconstruct and visit those old versions of themselves. The kid who learned how to be potty trained for months and months, there was all of a sudden, peeing in their pants. It's okay. It's part of the developmental process. They might need to revisit these parts of themselves on their way to their next developmental plateau. So I want there to be some hope here. If you are seeing regressive behavior in your students, that it's part of their adjustment. Okay, so that's one guideline. One size does not fit all. Next one. Any questions? Does anyone want me to stop talking for a second?
All right.
Okay.
Looks like you're good.
Okay. Second guideline is seeking collegial support. We talked about this in the first presentation. In my world, the key to good social work, the key to good therapy is to remember that you're not alone. I stole this idea from my national chapter, the National Association of Social Workers, a school-based therapist who said, I always, my secret weapon is my colleagues. You should not worry alone. And remember that there are teachers in your community and around the world who are facing similar challenges right now and should be relied on for consultation. How is our students adjustment impacting us personally. It has to be safe to discuss that. That has to be perfectly legal to bring up with your colleagues. How are we going to address the gray areas, student health and confidentiality? How are we going to go back to addressing CPS calls and risk assessments? Now that was a reality before COVID, right? But I think it bears repeating that your first most beautiful secret weapon here is each other teachers. And there's a time when it's good to consult outside your circle, outside your own platoon. And so when do we look beyond our school community for student mental health support? Next slide, please. Well, there's Jewish Family Services and Children's Hospital. These are the first two ones that I put up here for child therapy referral sources. But I'm not going to lie to you. The child therapists in our community, of which I am one, have really been stretched this year, and there's nowhere near enough of us. Children's Hospital is very open about the fact that the wait list there currently is a year to get a therapist. That the waiting list was something like 800 kids waiting to get outpatient psychotherapy. Now, the good news is they got a huge private donation. This is public knowledge, and are in the process of hiring a bunch more of therapists, which is wonderful. Our behavioral health workforce was stretched before COVID, and sadly, it's not easy getting a kid into their own therapist. One reason for that is actually a pretty interesting reason that I mentioned in the last presentation. More and more pediatricians are doing mental health screens, particularly the PHQ-9, which is a depression screen. And so when my daughter filled out one of these, when she went in for her well child visit, our pediatrician took her into a room and she filled out a questionnaire. And our pediatrician said, these things are great, but I don't know where to send these kids. Our waiting list is so long, and we're in the process of hiring more, but what do we do? I put these numbers up because JFS or Children's are great places to refer your kids to and to get on a waiting list, but also to consult. I put my personal office number up there, 225-1333, because while I'm not still taking new clients at the time, I hope that I can be a resource for consultation and triaging. So Children's is another great resource, though, particularly for medication management, for psychological evaluations and neuropsych evals. I have to include Shalva, SIPPY's, which SIPPY is associated with. Excellent organization particularly for addressing domestic violence in the Orthodox community. Am I representing you properly, SIPPY?
Yeah, I mean, I am connected in that we've brought them in to speak, here. Not that I work for them, but yeah, they're a great organization.
Based in Chicago, rabbinical consultation and free support, and a great website to call, and that's their hotline right there. Prisma, I suppose you guys are probably all familiar with this. This is the Network for Jewish Day Schools. Had some great stuff on their website for reopening of schools and mental health concerns for kids. So that's just another really good resource to call. Next slide. Okay, so again, wrapping up here the objective in my presentation about guidelines. So the first guideline was to really remember that to be mindful of our own desire to have a one-size-fits-all approach, because we want concrete guidelines to follow. We have to be careful because every child is different and COVID has impacted families differently. The second guideline was relying on collegial support and mental health support in the community. And the third guideline was to consider and be open to modified or suspended lesson planning. I spoke to the former head of social emotional learning at one of the large public school districts that I still serve in. And I remember her saying at the start of COVID, learning comes second, academics come second. We have to reach these kids socially and emotionally. Um, um, we need you on board, Aaron, for office hours, maybe not for crisis counseling for teachers and for students. While this may not quite be the philosophy of every school, this really is what I'm seeing in my own research right now for pediatric mental health and social emotional learning folks who say, look, for kids who may be returning to school for the first time, lockdown and social isolation really has impacted their development. And for some, it may take a little longer to adjust to being back in the building. It's like I said, I'm sure my own kids are going through an awful lot. Right now, what I see on the surface is their level of exhaustion, of just integrating stuff. And all of these impressions, sensory impressions, are being bombarded with being back in school. And so I think it would be good for us to have space conceptually that modified lesson planning or even suspended lesson planning to give our classrooms time to practice listening to each other. And you don't have to be a therapist to do this stuff, to practice some classroom exercises or things to give space for reintegration with each other. I mean, this is really this is really the philosophy of social emotional learning. Let's help these kids know how to track and pay attention to their own inner worlds, so they're going to know how to read others. And COVID has really disrupted that. So I just think that's an important part of the conversation to sort of be open to modified or even suspended lesson planning, to give space for social emotional learning, and what that might look like with active listening, I'm going to get into. So on the one hand, it's kids who are dealing with grief, who are dealing with all kinds of stuff coming back into class on the one hand. And then on the other hand, students like my oldest son, who is leaving for college in 10 days and can't wait to get away from us, and is so anxious to be learning again, and is really in this place of making up for lost time. That's a different kind of stress, I think. I think of students who may be entering yeshiva this year, who are in this, I've lost so much time. I really need to make up for lost time. That's a different conversation to have with those students. It doesn't have to be kids entering yeshiva. It could be kids entering second grade who are just thrilled to be back, and are all over you and all over each other, and to allow space for joy too. I mean, that has to be part of the equation too, right? One of my colleagues said, when this one of the schools I'm in, when it reopened in April, she said the kids are banging. She's a academic advisor. She said the kids are banging on my window again, and they're lining up behind my door, and it's music to my ears. So I want this to be part of my talk, that we give ourselves time to savor our students and loving being in that relational field with them again. That's a different kind of modification of lesson planning, isn't it? Savoring the classroom experience of being in each other's physical space again. So I guess, in summary, and we can flesh this out if people want me to say more on this, or talk to each other some more about this. What would modified or suspended lesson planning look like? I think we have to lead with flexibility. I think we have to allow space for unstructured time, and we have to allow for whatever my third bullet point was on there that I don't remember.
I'm sorry. I wanted to
That's
jump
okay.
in for a minute. I'll put it back up in a
Go
minute.
ahead. Please,
Um,
please go ahead.
I just finished a 3-day seminar with a place called Macomb in Philadelphia, which I'm happy to tell you guys about another time. It's a after school program, like based like Kid Center, except it's Jewish learning, and it's very it's a really, really neat approach to learning. They do it instead of like Hebrew school or Sunday school. But this whole conference was about something called placemaking. And it was very much about social, what is it?
SEL.
SEL, but they were talking about SESL. So added spiritual to it. And one of the things they talk about, and I think it would apply really well for this modified curriculum, was not to say throw out the curriculum, because in some ways kids are really dying to get back to learning, but to find ways to learn that use the topic you're teaching to get into some of this social, emotional, spiritual learning. So for example, to take a piece of Torah text and to study it in Chavruta, in partnership, where you've got kids having to talk to each other and do, attuned listening and, taking the text and applying it to their lives and exploring how they're feeling and doing group work with that. You can have some of the content you want to teach, but use it as a jumping off point for some of the social, emotional, spiritual learning. So I just wanted to throw that out there as an idea.
Fantastic. I think that's wonderful.
I don't know that it works so well for like math class or chemistry class, but I think a lot of the Jewish things that we're teaching, it works really well with in literature and even social studies.
I think that's fantastic. Any classroom environment, even before you start the algebra lesson for the day, can have placemaking as part of the classroom ritual and routine. Your teachers, you already know how to set up rituals and routines. I think that's wonderful. That's actually segues beautifully into my practical
Great
thing.
All right, I'll put your slideshow back up. Sorry about
Great.
that. I just wanted to jump for a minute.
That's great. I appreciate it.
Okay.
So some strategies for supporting social, emotional, and spiritual learning, right? I mentioned I did this a piece on this from the Jewish Chronicle around empathic and active listening, and it's really a powerful tool. I mean, we all want to teach our students how to be able to listen to each other, and it's something I just would like to, because it's one of these like therapy 101 skills that I learned a long time ago, and it's so easy to forget. What helps people feel comfortable and often brings them back to therapy to keep doing the work is an experience of being heard, of being seen, and being attuned to. And I've seen how teachers just can masterfully do this. So this is something you've already been doing. It's something you already know how to do, but let's just maybe share some time talking about what active listening looks and feels like. And I'll offer some suggestions on how to do this. So there is sort of a loose structure to suggest about how to nurture active listening in your classroom and in yourself. Starts with preparation, a certain kind of questioning that's open-ended, a stance that validates the inner experience of kids, and has an orientation that's collaborative, which I'll get to. Because my wife is a school psychologist, I feel like I can at least pretend like I have some credit here. And so I'll say more on the collaborate thing when I get to it. Next slide, please. So it might help to give yourself a little space and a little, just a moment to think about how you would prepare your class to get ready to listen. For students' own inner experiences, and to listen eventually, we hope, to each other. There's lots of reports already as kids are coming back of right away, just real hard time with concentration and listening. This was a concern before COVID. This guy, Julian Treasure, who's a listening scientist, business guy who has an interesting TED talk about how our culture is losing our listening. There's so much noise and so much distraction. And he suggests some actual exercises for just improving the quality of our listening. So here are 3 just sort of very, very short and easy kind of practical things we can do to nurture listening in the classroom. That doesn't have to, it doesn't mention COVID. It doesn't mean we have to talk about grief. We don't even have to talk about stress. All we're going to do is practice some little things on listening. And the first one is really just to play with silence. And silence, of course, is not really possible in a school. But just playing with the experience of sort of imposed quiet. And so just a 1 to 3 minute exercise to allow our ears to recalibrate to quiet. And you're the teacher, you'll take care of time. Students don't need to worry about the time, and they'll notice sounds that are in the classroom. We can never get things to be perfectly silent. But if you want to practice in your own space, sitting with 3 minutes of silence, as a way of allowing your ears to recalibrate, to decrease noise and decrease distraction. That's one form of preparation. Another one is exercises for practicing discernment, and this is cool. You can pull up on YouTube, if you guys have smart boards, you don't even need a smart board, but some kind of YouTube clip, and it usually comes with a picture like this, of a nature sound or a happy playground, where you just ask students with their eyes closed or eyes partially closed and focusing on a point in front of them, and just picking out sounds in the nature sound. And then processing afterwards. Did you notice more than one bird sound in the nature sound? Did you notice, most of them will hear the stream, but did you notice there was an echo when the bird did this? How many different sounds did people notice? And if you don't have YouTube or a smart board or speakers, that's fine. Just have them discern sounds in the classroom while everyone tries to be quiet. And then, you play with it. List the number of sounds. Can we see if we were able to pick out anything else? And so it's a game. Savoring interesting or mundane sounds is another way of helping to nurture discernment in hearing and in listening. You can have a recording. I mean, you pull up on YouTube's got great sounds in there. You pull up a washer dryer, and have the screen turned off, but mundane sounds like a tea kettle going off or the rhythm of a washer dryer, and just asking people to guess what this thing is and write it down. Go ahead. Yeah. Did you want to, would be interesting to play with the sound of a shofar. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Right. So we're like the whole class kind of focusing and savoring this sound together. Another one is this wonderful game that I don't know why, but it's never failed me. I've done this with young children and 5th, 6th, even 7th graders, and this is the RAIN game. This is teacher directed, and it's a crescendo game, kind of, where the class follows you in there's no words. I like to get the group in a circle, but they don't have to be, but they look at you and you tell sort of set it up where they're going to mimic what you're doing. And now the whole class is snapping. And then as you move from that, you move to patting on your thighs. And then they move to you stomping. Basically it's a RAIN game. You then move it from stomping to patting on your thighs to RAIN again. Well, this is the YouTube clip shows it well. It's really fun. and it just makes a really cool sound. Has anyone ever done this before? Oh, I mean, okay. It's just a lovely, and you control the speed, you control the level of noise.
You want me to play the clip?
Yeah, please. It's only like a minute long. Oh yeah, I can start with this. Was real quiet. Molly, Beth, you did that today at camp? What method do you do?
We just were doing like the basic, like a storm, and just repeating, like following to see if they could follow what we were doing, and clapping and different, but same kind of thing.
I just love it because it's a sound that it's an orchestra the kids are making together.
Yeah.
And the teacher you can sort of modify how it goes, and then it gets. There's something about when you come off the storm and it gets smaller, and now you can get real quiet and really milk that quiet time with no words. It's all nonverbal. So yeah, and what are you doing? You're getting the class to listen to each other, getting them ready to listen to each other. Yeah. We're not getting them ready. They are listening to each other, but it's really setting these pathways for deeper and deeper listening. And this is so nice because it's physical. Yeah, anybody else who did the rain game have any modifications of it or anything like that? Okay. All right, we can go back to the thing.
I would do that. I was a toddler teacher for a long time.
Yeah.
And they love to copy everything you're doing. So to make patterns and stuff, they love that.
Oh, it's so great. And then probably, there's probably space to get a student to do it, to lead it, would someone else like to lead, or a team of 3, or, whatever. There's so many ways you can modify it. So, okay. So let's talk about practical applications for active listening. There are really some kind of basic ways to set up your own orientation that we're hoping to nurture in the class and how they relate to each other. First is open-ended questions. So as teachers and as therapists, we're going to be careful about yes or no responses. So questions that start with does, did, and will, and look instead to how, what, why do you think? You do this already as teachers. I know this is just validating stuff that you already do, but I'm going to draw from my wife here, who says, and as a school psychologist, she says, many of the teachers that she's interacted with are there. They want to teach. They want to guide students towards that answer, and can get rigid in that way, and have an issue with meandering. As a therapist, I meander all day long. That's what I do. And I realize teachers have a different set of expectations. But again, if we're looking at sort of a modified sort of social, emotional, spiritual learning orientation here, I think we have to have space for open-ended questions in classroom if we're going to nurture a student's ability to hear each other. So just tracking, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but just sort of tracking open-ended questions. And I'll give some examples of that. Again, the good news is you're already doing this. When you ask your students to reflect about a story, when you plant seeds for prediction, how's this going to end up? You're not looking for a specific answer. You're looking for hypotheses. You're looking for meandering. And it's okay, ask them, you can ask them to remember details, ask them to remember specific things. That's okay. But opening things up for impromptu stories during story time, you circle up and you say, it was the summer of 2021 when, and it's like a modified telephone game, right? And it can get creative and expressive. This is how you can kind of tie in COVID and how we as a class are going to be sharing our experience of COVID as we feel comfortable doing. So impromptu storytelling, I think, is a really great way. Again, open-ended. What I learned about friendship this year. What I hope most for in 2021. Future orientation is the greatest I don't like the word weapon, but I'm going to use it. Future orientation is the greatest weapon against depression. Anything that inspires our future orientation. Then consider going to the New York Times. New York Times has for older kids, a great collection of writing prompts that I think are therapeutically spot on, and I think really appropriate for English teachers. So therapeutic writing prompts. Next slide. So open-ended questions. I'm going to say a little bit more about open-ended questions here. What changed and what stayed the same? This is a great activity book called the COVID Kids Activity Book, where, we share this slideshow. I mean, this is stuff you guys can make copies of if you want and make it your own. But in circle time, I think really good to have some exercises about what has changed and what stayed the same. So traditions that we kept, absolutely tie that into SESL. How was davening different during lockdown, and how is it to be doing davening again now? So what has changed and what has stayed the same? This is really important. We work with a lot of kids from divorced families, and this is one of the most basic things I encourage co-parents to ask their kids. What are they worried is going to change? What's going to stay the same? So traditions we kept and new traditions we started. So this puts the focus on the positive, right? A lot of kids who have talked about their family slowing down during lockdown. I have a single dad who has talked a lot to me about he never had so many sit-down meals with his daughter than during lockdown. I think it's important when there's any significant change in a family's life that we honor that period that they went through. So we're going to honor, let's spend some time to honor what our family went through and new traditions that we start. So giving kids time to process this. And then next slide, please. Looking back on this period of your life, looking back together as a classroom. New things that we tried. Places we went during lockdown. This is stuff you talk about when you come back from summer vacation as well. On days that were extra hard, here's things that we did as a family. Here's some of the things we need. You don't have to be a therapist to do these things. These are, I think, are how you nurture sharing and listening amongst your kids.
Do you think that I'll stop sharing for a minute. Do you think that when these conversations come up in class, that there's going to be conflict, not among the really little kids, but among families that handled COVID very differently? Like some kids are going to be coming in and saying, we did nothing, we went nowhere, we stayed home all the time. And some kids are going to coming in saying, we went to Disneyland and we went to State Fair and we went. Mm-hmm. And do you think that kids coming in whose parents said, you can't, are then going to be feeling bad about the kids who went everywhere? I mean, do you think this is going to be, I'm not talking about preschoolers now, but by second, third grade?
It could. And I think who better than the classroom teacher to create a safe space to have those discussions? I think it certainly could. And I think the great thing to be primed for. My experience was so different than his experience. What's so different about me, or what's so different about my family? I think I think it would be better for teachers to be the one leading that conversation and sort of preempting it with questions like those open-ended questions. What new things did I learn? And so, yeah, I think even to expect discrepancy, and how we can still, and this is how we're going to honor differences in our classrooms, how we can still be a class even though we experience such different things during this time.
Just trying to think about how it goes home, right? Little
Yeah,
Johnny
you
comes
bet.
home and said, "Hey, Susie got to do all these things during COVID and you told me it wasn't safe. That's not fair. We should start doing these things."
Yeah,
right?
I think that, yeah.
Or Susie goes home and says, "Hey, Johnny's family didn't do any of this stuff. Are we in danger?" Like, I'm just trying to think how this plays out, even if it's not in the classroom, like if it leads to things at home.
Yeah, and it's uncertain how this is going to how it would play out. Far better, I think, for it to be in the classroom than on the playground. Because yes, kids experienced COVID differently. Families experienced COVID differently. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all sort of thing. And in this classroom, we don't judge people on their experience. In this classroom, it's safe to share. And if there's obviously, if teacher has a concern about a kid's reaction, that's a phone call home saying, "Here's what we talked about today." So families are primed, and families dealt with COVID differently. Families had different losses. Clearly, if a kid is now saying, I lost my primary caregiver, I lost a dear family member, and is not sure, that's a referral, that's a consultation, that's at least a phone call home. Obviously, with these open-ended questions, we're not leading with what did you lose during COVID. It's what new things maybe did you learn? What things stayed the same? I think that's even more critical to stay with, because we all wanted to know this too in our lives when we were all in free fall and trying to adjust, right? What can we still rely on? What still stays the same? So, yeah, if that's a concern and you're feeling out your classroom on day 3, and it seems like, wow, we have some real sharp discrepancies here, then modify these questions. Things about what traditions have we all been able to rely on, and having a talk around that, and how does that feel to know that no matter what, even through this time, we were still doing these rituals and routines at home and at temple, and that seems to me to be a safe way to address any sharp discrepancies in sort of family rules. And this is the gift of Jewish education, right? You have these rituals and routines that unite the whole class. So that may be a safer way to sort of feel out any sharp differences in kids' experiences.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Does anyone have any ideas on that? I think it's really nice to have this question now, Zippy. How am I going to deal as a teacher with 2 kids with fundamentally vastly different experiences? What if there's only 2 kids that have this experience of strict rules, strict lockdown at home, maybe stayed remote the whole time, versus this other family who sent their kids back as soon as they could, or who did hybrid? These are things that we have to be ready to deal with as a class. This is why we're going to get good at listening to each other.
A lot of the teachers who are on right now are preschool teachers and have been teaching straight through. Have the kids brought any of the stuff up, the older preschoolers, or is this not stuff you're hearing from them?
Or is anyone noticing like real sharp differences in how kids seem to be handling, reentry or that? Is there any concern that developmentally appropriate ways of processing COVID could backfire?
Can you restate that a little bit differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Zippy's bringing up is a really good question. If we're going to do active listening and set up environments in class where, we're gonna nurture kids' social and emotional learning, we might come across some of these potential landmines, right? Where one kid's experience of COVID was really, really different from another kid's. And I guess the question is, have we seen that anywhere in your preschool or with young children, where conflict arises in the class where, that's not what it was like in my house?
I think a long time ago, I had a student, and it wasn't maybe a third grader, second or third grade. A child said something that they did, and one of the other children said, "I'm not allowed to do that yet. That's not fair." I just let them ping pong back and forth. And the child who was not allowed to didn't argue. He just said, "Shucks, it's not, my parents are mean, or my parents are strict, or whatever." And I just watched. The kids ended up being really nice friends.
Yeah. I just wonder about it because it's so politically charged. You watch the news and these school board meetings and parents shouting at each other, and kids parrot what they hear at home. So if, some kids are coming into school and saying, people who won't get vaccines are stupid, or people who don't wear masks are stupid, they don't know what they're doing. And other people are like, oh, it's just people are trying to tell us what to do and we got to speak to power. Like, I don't know. I just wonder if any of that is going to be coming out in the schools.
Well, I do think that's where some at that point, that's where you can rely on school policy. If school policy, I'm assuming, is going to be clear about social distancing, mask use, and stuff like that.
What people are doing at school, but that doesn't mean they're not going to be talking about what they're doing outside of school and what their parents think about it. And it may be complaining about, school policy. This is really stupid. Our school should be doing something different because here's what mom and dad say. I don't know. Maybe I'm imagining things. I just wonder what that's going to look like.
Or even, like you said, you're sharing at circle time, like, "Oh, I went to Disney World," or something like that. And then that child goes home and says, "So-and-so went to Disney World." Then that parent questioning, how come that family's going all over the world, or quote unquote, all over the world, and we've been in lockdown for 18 months. Right? Like how to navigate that. So the thing, like, we see things like that, right? Which more of a parent issues, kind of the wrong word, but right. And the other thing, like with 4s and below, typically kids say, what we've seen a lot of is like, "Oh, I went to Chicago," or something like that. And then all of a sudden 3 other or 7 other kids in the class also went to Chicago, right? But really nobody ever went to Chicago. Right? Okay. So it's a lot of parroting, and that's kind of what we've seen a lot of the last, 18 months.
Yeah, and what is coming to my mind is, this is a little bit later on the collaboration part, how teachers know how to work with those differences as they come up in a classroom. Now, I'm noticing right now, we're hearing different experiences here and different families with different rules. And wasn't there a time before COVID when we talked about how we handle things that are different in different households? I'm going to kind of make it a value, about how we handle differences. Do we remember that time when we had a kid, I think it's good to remember pre-COVID how we handled these things as a classroom community, and how we integrated newcomers. that maybe had a different accent than our own. Or if you as a child and you as an individual can remember a time when you first came across someone who was different, who had different rules in their house, and what was that like? And how we as a classroom, you may remember times as a classroom how you handled things that were different. I mean, maybe there's the opportunity. But Karen, to your point, I think that really starts to come into the realm of phone calls home to some parents. Here's what came up today.
Right.
And here's how we're dealing with this as a classroom. And it could be an opportunity to repeat school policy if that helps to sort of ground where a teacher's coming from. But as a classroom, we work on nurturing listening and living in a world where there's differences.
I keep thinking that before COVID, we had a lot of differences in class in terms of religious practices, in terms of which children come to school, to Hebrew school regularly, which children come to synagogue regularly, who does their homework, who doesn't. So I think this is all playing into all of that. I think children know this. We just don't do that in our house. I know you do that. I wish I could do it, but we just don't do that. I've heard the kids lots of times, I wish we could do it. And they survive.
And they can even become friends.
Yeah.
I think that's a great story. And we all have these teachers have great stories of how there was this time when this student was doing this and then they couldn't get along. And now then we're,
The kids may deal with it better than the parents would, with the differences.
Yeah. Good. I only have a couple more little slidey things.
All right,
I know we're at
we'll go
8
back.
o'clock though. So if people have to go, I want to respect your time. We have.
All right, let me say two things in case people have to leave, but then I'll go back to the slides. First of all, I will send out the slideshow and the homework assignment tomorrow. Second of all, I really hope all of you can join us on August 24th, which is next week, where we're going to have the panel on inclusion, which is going to look at how do we make sure we are including kids who come from interfaith families, LGBTQ families, families or kids that have disabilities, and which one did I leave out? Oh, and I really have to work on this. I keep wanting to say special needs, and I've been told I'm not supposed to say special needs. Disabilities, kids with disabilities. I said disabilities? Disabilities, LGBTQ, and racial diversity and interfaith. Sorry, it's getting late in the evening. All right, I'm going to put the slideshow back up.
Could I offer a name that I use from my mother? My mom was a social worker for forever and ever, and she worked with what she calls differently abled adults.
Oh, I like that. Oh, wow.
My problem is the language keeps changing, and I get used to, and then it comes back. But what I've been told in the community now that people with disabilities, and that's what's being used. But I like differently abled, but
differently abled adults.
It's so not judgmental.
Yeah. I also like neurodiverse.
Neurodiverse is, and that's good, but that doesn't get into all people with disabilities, right? If you've got somebody who's blind, they're not neurodiverse.
True.
Right. So that's not inclusive of everything we want to talk about.
Right.
Sorry, I'm going to put this back
up. You can go to the next one. Okay. So in active listening, we want to prepare the space. We want to use open-ended questions. We want to validate kids' feelings. So, I mean, I sort of got this in discussion with my wife. Teachers want to teach. There may be a real urge to fix. Instead, what will help nurture listening in your students is reflecting back what you think you heard. So this is what good interviewers do all the time. It's what good salespeople do too. Here's what I think I hear you saying. And you don't even have to comment on their words, comment on their, obviously, right? With little kids, you guys do this all the time. It seems like you're feeling blank about blank. Based on your balled up fists, based on what I see your body doing right now. It seems like you're feeling blah. Do I have that right? So not even going in to fix it. Not even going, here's what you need to do. But just reflecting what you see. And why is that important? Here's our last slide. Why is it important to validate their feelings? Oh, here's some other open-ended questions to elicit feelings. So what's this taught you about your values? You can get this from the slideshow, but these are just some open-ended questions I came across I think would be great for group discussion. To bring it back to values, things that didn't change. What values are more connected to now? Because there's sort of positive way of looking at it as a class on how we're coping with COVID and coming back. I think basic questions about basic needs. How's your sleep change? How do you feel that in your body? What are you learning about yourself this time? Okay, next. The kind of hopeful endpoint of active and empathic listening, the hopeful endpoint of open-ended questions, the hopeful endpoint of being oriented towards simply checking in with your kids' feeling states, and which you can do individually and as a classroom. I'm sensing that the class is this right now, and I just wonder if I have that right. The emotional tone of the room. I think it's good for a teacher to reflect back on. Why is this important? When a kid feels seen, feels felt, and feels heard, that's how they learn that's what gives them a sense of agency in the world. That's how they come to know that they can take adaptive action. And adults simply need to show up and reflect what they think they see. This works great in small groups. Activities that practice active listening and open-ended question, reflective listening, really generates creative and collaborative problem solving. So you guys have probably heard of Ross Green, the collaborative problem solving model, which has an unfortunate acronym of CPS. I don't know why he didn't get a different. So it's not Child Protective Services, it's collaborative problem solving, which is a whole method for, kids do well when they can. It's not the kids are intentionally doing poorly. It's because they're having difficulty with whatever it is. So specific activities to generate discussion, looking backward for clues. We talked about this before. How did we deal with this as a class before? So as or with your last teacher, I know Mrs. whoever, the teacher that you guys had last year, how did we deal this with as a class before? So looking backward as a class together for clues. And then working with groups on planning ahead. Zippy really did us a favor with this predictive question. So it's always better to be preventive, right? And so as a class, you can beat the class to this with Zippy's very question. COVID impacted us all differently. I wonder, you keep it nice and wide open. I wonder how we're going to deal with this as a class, because, some families had different rules. I wonder as a class how we're going to learn. You can sort of use hypnotic language, which is predictive. I wonder how we're going to learn how we're going to listen to each other. I wonder what that's going to look like when we are listening to each other and each other's experiences. Because we met some certain challenges like this in the past as a community. I wonder how we're going to be dealing with being in a room together again, for some who have been in a room together, but others who haven't. So open-ended questions, opportunities to validate feelings, to check in with each other. Here's what I think I hear you saying. Here's what you seem to be going through. Provide this opportunity for a kid to feel felt and to feel seen and to feel heard. And that's what nurtures their ability for adaptive, the ability to take adaptive action. Trauma and overwhelm short circuits our ability to take adaptive action. And so we've developed these habits that maybe aren't so adaptive or so effective, but that's because we forget that we're all creatures that are capable of incredible nimbleness and incredible improvisation. And overwhelming experience has a way of deadening that, or flattening it out. And so I guess I would like to remind you as teachers, last slide here. Oh, it's a little game. It's just a little listening game. Let's skip this one. I'd rather go to the last slide because it's more fun. Last one. As teachers, I want you to lean on each other. I showed this in my first presentation. I just couldn't get away from this one. This, amazingly, is outside a hospital. I think it's like Boston Children's Hospital or something. Someone took a picture of it.
Oh my God.
When we feel felt, when we feel supported and nurtured, that's when we're at our best. That's when we can make improvisational moves in the moment and think on our feet and remember that we are nimble and highly creative people. And that's what we're trying to nurture in our kids in our classes. Thank you for your time. Thanks for letting me go over. It's great to see everybody again. I really look forward to the day when I get to see you all in person and have a more natural conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care, everybody. Have a good supper if you haven't eaten yet. I'm going to go do that.
Thanks, Aaron.